So Noah, talk about the impetus for your Mormon faith transition. What do you remember the first moment when you were open to the possibility the church wasn't true? Do you remember what caused it? Talk a bit about the beginning of your transition.
Sure. So the first time it ever occurred to me was I was going through in my personal life, going through a breach of confidence from somebody close to me that really impacted me because it was just kind of out of left field. I never suspected that this person close to me do could do this. So kind of what happened is in the middle of that there was this um, first there's usually the shock or the being upset about finding out somebody has been dishonest with you and thinking and the second to that was thinking, how did I not notice this? How did I totally misread this situation as it was happening? Why didn't I see this coming? And that with time turned into, if I was incapable um, of under of what's the word, discerning this person that I thought I knew so well, what else could I be wrong about? I remember that was the first time it ever occurred to me that I could actually be wrong about my assessment of anything, because my assessment of one thing was off. And that didn't translate to doubting my beliefs or anything at first. It just translated to, I thought I didn't know I could be wrong about something. And with time, that kind of turned into, well, geez, what if I was wrong about everything? If I'm wrong about one thing, what if I'm wrong about everything? And what things could I be wrong about? And that's the first time I think the idea even entered my mind. Well, what if I was wrong about my beliefs? What if I was wrong about the way I understand the world? Um, and it just stayed at that, and then to try to gain more certainty in that uncertainty, I thought what I really need to do is just study and become very scholarly in my understanding of anything that I want to feel certain about. And I wanted to feel certainty in my beliefs, so I started studying anything that felt scholarly outside of the typical things that you study. Like I knew that everything I've ever read in this book, makes sense. So I started going into other things like church history specifically. And the first time I encountered stories that were different from the version of the stories that I understood or that I had known about, it left me with an uneasy feeling because I was already so sensitive to the idea of being misled or being deceived in any way. I was highly sensitive to that. So it piqued my interest. And I think, well, I didn't know this. Let me look into that more. And the more I would learn about something, a specific topic, the more uneasy I felt because the more I was reminded of how easy it is to be lied to or to be deceived. Now that didn't necessarily mean I was being lied to or deceived, and I still hold that position that doesn't mean the same thing to be lied to as it does to feel like you're being lied to. And that's where my problem was, is I didn't want to feel like there was anything being hidden from me. And the more I dug, the more I felt there was stuff that was being hidden from me, and that was difficult for me to work with because I was very sensitive to that.
Noah, what did it feel like to contemplate the possibility that this church, this Mormon church that you had dedicated your whole life to and that you loved so much and had made such covenants with and commitments to, might not be true? And accompanying that, what were your biggest fears about leaving it?
I think that it's an earth-shattering experience. It's a lot like feeling like the ground that you're standing on is crumbling, and you don't know where to step because you don't know what's going to give way. And I think anyone who's been through a faith transition would probably know what that feels like. And it can be, it's just really difficult because it's like the skeleton or the outline of how you make sense of the world is suddenly shaky, and maybe it's not what you think it is, and it's I think it's frightening. And I think some people will react with anger, some with fear. For me, I think there was much more fear than there was anger. um, it was just I was not comfortable with the uncertainty. I wanted to know, and the more I wanted to know, the more uncomfortable I was, because the more uh, real the prospect became of what if you'll never know? What if these are unknowable things? And I found a lot of difficulty with the prospect that, well, wait, if they're completely unknowable things, I don't like that. I have to know. I need certainty. So that's kind of the spiral, the way it started to go for me.
Noah, once you started contemplating the possibility that the Mormon church wasn't what you thought it was there anything actually exciting or positive about the prospect of it not being true and or of leaving it altogether and not participating? Was there anything that you liked or that was exciting about that?
Um,
Or relieving?
I not at first. I think at first the prospect was still terrifying for me. It wasn't until I started uh, researching other ways of thinking, other ideologies, other religions, other philosophies, that I started to feel at ease. I mean, I recognized early on that there are people who live happy, healthy lives who don't share my same beliefs. And I thought, so the beliefs themselves can't be indicators of, what determines if you're going to have a happy and healthy life. I remember uh, learning that early on, and then started to look at, where do I see people who are very content, who are very happy, who seem to be the opposite of what I was experiencing internally at that time, which is just fear. And I saw that a lot in people like the Dalai Lama, for example, where it's like, I want to feel like that. There's just this um, worry-free attitude or disposition. Um, so when I started studying Buddhism specifically, I think that's the first time I started feeling that sense of ease again, thinking it's okay to not have certainty, and then it started to feel from going from fear to feeling that excitement of, well, if it's not what I always thought it was, then it might be something I've never even imagined. And that's where I think the more creative side of me kind of felt free, like, well, that's exciting. That means it could be anything. And ever since then, I've kind of tried to maintain that openness of it could be anything, including what I at first thought it was. Like, I haven't. It makes it so everything's on the table. This idea of possibility.
Noah, as you were in your sort of crisis of faith, as you were really doubting and questioning Mormonism, did Mormon apologetics play a role in your transition? When I say Mormon apologetics, I mean the farms, I mean the Maxwell Institute, I mean Fair Mormon, even things like Richard Bushman or Terrell Givens. Talk about the role of apologetics in your transition.
Yeah, I think in my case, the apologetics were not beneficial. I feel like the more I would read,
What
now,
would you read and look into? Give us some examples.
I spent a lot of time on farms, reading. If a certain topic would come up, the first thing I wanted to know is what is the counter to this. I was not very interested in the, I guess you could say the anti side, because I already felt like that's tainted and influenced. I want to know what is the legitimate response to this from somebody I can trust. So those were the only resources I was going to. What the farms and um, the Maxwell Institute, like, what are they saying? And I would read stuff there, but it was difficult because I would read the response and then I'd be left thinking that didn't satisfy the question for me. It didn't answer it. I wanted it to be pretty like, here's the answer, and be like, ha, see, now how could you doubt? But I wasn't getting that. I'd be like, well, I get why people are doubting because this doesn't make sense. And then I'd read the response and be like, well, now I'm only doubting more because this doesn't make sense to that. So in my case, in some ways, I guess you could say it was more of a backfire because I felt like, well, if anyone, there should be a source that, explains in a very satisfactory way any question that could possibly come up. But that source wasn't doing it for me. It just left me with more questions.
Noah, to what extent did you try and remain active in the church, or have you remained active in the church as a semi-believer or as a non-believer? Is that been part of your journey?
Yeah, it has. For me, it's been important to try to remain um, active in the sense that I feel like because it's a path that affects people that I love, namely my spouse and my children. And if it affects my children and my spouse, it affects her parents and her siblings, and so that's something that I try to stay very sensitive to. I don't want anyone in my circles to feel that I view this from an opposing stance of, if you believe this, well, I don't believe this, therefore, I have a problem with you believing it. I kind of feel like I'm still involved with it and I participate in the ways that I can to show support because I know this is meaningful and special uh, to the people that I care about. Um, and it's only difficult because I think sometimes the implication of being involved is that you agree with or share the belief of whatever's being discussed. And in my case, I feel like it doesn't. I want to be involved and participating in a way where it's also clear that that doesn't necessarily mean I believe the same thing that you believe or the same stance that the church has on this specific topic. But so that part can be hard because I don't feel that that's the place to be there saying, well, I'm here, but I need you to know that I don't agree with you. I don't do that either. I don't think that's productive or beneficial or wise. Um, so I'm just kind of there. And and I enjoy the parts of it that I enjoy, and the parts that are more difficult, I just kind of try to stay away from that.
So Noah, it's one thing to sort of be doubting and questioning as a Mormon, but it's a totally different thing to contemplate coming out to other Mormons as non-believers, especially loved ones. And so, what was it like to contemplate coming out as a non-believer or an Orthodox believer? Did you have fears? Did you have concerns? And talk about who it was that you first came out to, how you did it, and how that went.
Okay. Yeah. I think I mentioned before the overall sentiment of this entire part of my journey was fear, terrifying fear. And the idea of coming out to anyone and telling them, hey, I might not believe the same things that you believe was terrifying because I felt like it would in their mind.
I'm here. Don't worry. Keep going.
Oh, I was going to say I lost you. In their mind, it would um, lower their standing of their opinion of me. So I felt like, um, you know, uh, especially in the church, I think sometimes one of the things that we value in each other is, oh, so and so is so righteous, or so and so has such a strong testimony, and it's a virtue. The scale of belief becomes a virtue. And sometimes that overshadows even the actions of a person because someone can be judgmental or be harsh, unkind, but it's okay because we value the scale of the intensity of their belief. And I think that causes, that's where like the phrase of it's not enough to just believe. It's not enough to hope. You have to believe. And it's not even enough to believe. You have to believe beyond a shadow of a doubt. So that mindset made it difficult for me to admit not only do I believe a little bit less than a shadow of a doubt, it was like, how do you tell someone, well, I might not believe this at all? It seemed like it was going to be an immediate, it would have an immediate effect on my value, the value that I have in that group or in that social setting. And I felt that's how it would be with my family. I certainly felt that's how it would be with my spouse. Why would she want to remain married to someone who doesn't believe? Why would anyone do that? So those were hard concepts for me. So for a long time, I maintained it kind of like just a very hidden thing. And the first person I even started to share anything with was my twin brother, because I felt he's one of the closest people to me. And at this specific stage in my life, I felt he was the right person to reach out to, because we're so close. I felt no matter what I say to him, he would never disown me. So the first time that I even hinted at the idea of maybe not quite believing the way that I gave off the impression that I did, I remember detecting a hint of resistance on his part, probably concern more than anything. Like, no, this is scary stuff. Don't go down that route. And a few months more went by with it festering for me. This festering feeling of I have no one to talk to, and these are difficult concepts that I need to hash out with someone. So I finally called him one day and just said, look, I want to discuss some things that are probably difficult to have to hear, but I don't know who else to reach out to, and I can't process this alone. And he was extremely receptive and was like, of course, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm always that person for you. So I started sharing some ideas with him. What if this isn't this? What if that isn't that? And I read this or I read that. And he was very kind and just compassionate in listening to me, while at the same time maintaining like, well, yeah, that can be confusing, but don't worry about it. I'll help you find the answer that makes make sense. And I think a lot of his initial study and investigation into these topics was with the intent of, how do we help each other to answer this or to answer that? And the more time that went by, it ate at him too, where he was like, well, this doesn't make sense to me. And before I knew it, out of the blue, one day he told me that, okay, I don't believe, I no longer believe, and I'm kind of done with it. I don't want to go to church anymore. And I felt horrible. I felt like unwittingly I had caused somebody to apostatize, and I just felt guilt. I felt like, this is why you don't talk about your doubts to people. At the time, I had very significant doubts about everything at that point, but I felt like it was unfair to influence someone else based on my own doubts, and I felt like I had done just that. But as more time went by, I started to realize, no, this isn't on me. I'm not the one who wrote this or wrote that, or I didn't say this, I didn't do that. And I started to kind of let go of that personal guilt that I was feeling associated with my faith journey. And around this time, my parents had also decided at that point that they were just not interested in being involved with it anymore. So I was kind of left alone in my family. I was the only one left. And still, hadn't talked to my wife about it at all. In fact, she was kind of thinking, what is going on with your family? And these are really scary times. These are uncertain times. And so I started formulating when and how I was going to talk to her. And I was very scared. I was convinced that was going to be the end of our marriage. The moment I confessed to being a skeptic or to being a doubter, that was it. It was going to be over. And I obviously love my wife, and I didn't want that to end. So I didn't want to have to come out, and I didn't want her family to think less of me, because her family, they're all very good, kind, hard-working, Orthodox people. And I think I didn't want to let them down. I didn't want them to have to deal with the stress of, oh, we have a son-in-law who doesn't believe, or anything along those lines. So those were all factors that weighed in to when and how But at the end of the day, I just needed to be myself. I felt like I was living a very inauthentic life where it was easy to just go along, but it was difficult to um, wrestle in my mind knowing I just don't believe these things. And it wasn't that I thought there was anything wrong with believing them. In fact, I wished I believed them. I wished that I could go back to where, the time when I didn't have any doubts. It would have been so much easier. But you can't, almost in the same way that you see those pictures that are like little pixelation pictures, and then when you look at it, all of a sudden you focus beyond it and you see something you never saw before. From that moment on, you can never go back and not see that. At that point, that's how I felt with my religious views. Once I had taken that step of thinking, well, what if none of it is what I thought it is, and that made sense to me, I could never go back to making sense of it being a limited scope or a narrow view.
What was it like to contemplate coming out to your wife, Giselle? What did you fear? And then what was it like coming out to her? And how did you do it? And what was her reaction?
Okay. Yeah, so the process of leading up to coming out about being skeptic or skeptical minded or not believing was terrifying because I just knew that was going to be the end of my marriage. It was going to be the end of a lot of good things. And I didn't want that to be the scenario, but I felt it was more important to be honest and then deal with it than to just hide it for convenience. So I went on a trip to California with a bunch of friends. I'm part of a group that does adventure travel, and we were there learning from a Navy SEAL how to survive in the wilderness for like a week in Colorado. And it was a really cool experience. And during that survival process, I'm processing how emotionally I'm also trying to survive, going through something that's difficult, that feels like it's about to be the end. And I think that trip was the catalyst to be able to come home with the confidence that, what I learned that week was how to survive. Doesn't matter what happens, you adapt and you survive. That was kind of the Navy SEAL message that I got that weekend. And I felt that was the right timing to come back and tell my wife the same thing. Like, as painful as this is going to be, this is what it is. And I just need to be upfront with you about the reality of how I am viewing things. And to her credit, and honestly to everyone's credit on her side of the family and in my community, has been a remarkable experience because as painful as it was for her to hear that, and as sad as she was hearing that, of course she's crying as I'm telling her all this, there was hope, and I think there was faith in we're going to be okay. This is okay. It doesn't have to mean, the end of the world for us. It doesn't have to mean the end of our relationship. I think at that moment, there was a renewed commitment to each other, thinking, this is the authentic me communicating with the authentic you, the frightened me that doesn't know how to process belief, and the frightened you that doesn't know how to accept or understand disbelief. And we're working together. And I was pleasantly surprised with the outcome. And quite honestly, I think that's one of the pinnacle moments in our relationship that I look back to and think, that was hard, and we did it. And it took time, and it's taken a lot of communication with each other, but I feel like we're both at a place where we feel very secure with our relationship and with the direction that our relationship is headed. And I didn't expect that it was going to be like that. And then, taking that a step further, I thought, well, okay, now I guess I just have to get used to her family's going to hate me. I'll always be the black sheep of the family. And I didn't get that either. I felt like, her family was very, as difficult as it is to process something like that from an Orthodox believing standpoint, they've been very warm and receptive, and I've had multiple occasions with several of them where I've felt that intimacy of acceptance, like, sure, this is hard, and sure, I don't like it, But that doesn't change the fact that you're in our family and we love you. And that has meant, sorry, I think that's been the most pleasant part of this entire experience is realizing that people who don't agree with you and who don't understand your beliefs or your disbeliefs can still love you and can still accept you. And the reverse also happening because it was easy for a time to think, well, if it isn't what I thought it is, then my current view that it must be right, more right than my former view. And I think I remember that thought of, the moment I know that I'm right, I'm by association, there's the insinuation that you're wrong. And I felt that for them. And I felt like, okay, well, now that I know this probably isn't true, I felt sorry for somebody who did believe, who continued to believe. And then that went away because I felt like, well, how unfair is that in return? To have somebody feel like my path of being a non-believer or a non-theist is in any way less valid than the path of someone who is a believer. You get that, and I've certainly felt that at times. But I thought I want to make sure I never do that backwards. I don't view my path as any more correct or any better than the path of someone who does choose to believe or choose to have faith that their belief is the right belief. I try to respect that and recognize my path is just my path. It's not the path. It's certainly not the right path. It's just my path. And I feel like I've been given a lot of freedom to be authentic to my path, even though it is painful, I think, at times for those who are on the believing path to have to accept that I'm on a different path. So I've been pleasantly surprised with the love and support and affection from my wife and from her family.
Noah, I know your children are quite young, but how have you and Giselle handled coming out to your children, or the idea of coming out to your children as non-believers or as non-traditional believers or as progressive believers? Have you talked to your children? If you're not, if so, how have you approached that and how has that gone?
My kids are still pretty young, 7, 4, and 1, and it hasn't really been a topic that is relevant at this point. I think the few instances we've had where we discuss concepts, and we've talked about dinosaurs and evolution. We talked about, my son asked us one day if Adam and Eve were the first human beings, did they have belly buttons like all the rest of us? And those were fun little opportunities to discuss with them in the setting where my wife and I were both able to kind of talk about, well, this, this is what mommy thinks about this, and she would explain her view, and she was great about turning then and saying, well, Daddy, what do you think? And I could say, well, the way I view this, and I could explain my view, and then at the end turn it back to them and say, what do you think? And didn't matter what they'd say at that point. It was just like, well, good, that's kind of your view. And I know on my end, and I think I've detected this a couple times just in our family setting too. There's kind of this approach of there are two ways of viewing this in our family. There's this is how I view it. This is how this person Dad views it, Mom views it. But you get to have your view, and your view is always going to be the one that matters most to you because that one's yours. And I've stressed it on multiple occasions when the opportunity was right that my view will always be mine, and I don't expect my view to be your view, to my 7-year-old, because you get to have your own view, and it's okay if yours is different than mine. It's okay if it's different than mommy's, and it's okay if it's different than both of us. And that's kind of how we've maintained it for now. I'm sure as they get older and the topics become a little bit more complex, I'm sure there will be moments where we will have difficulty with how we explain certain things. But for the most part, my wife and I have sat down and realized that in spite of having different beliefs, our values still line up. And the values can be the same. So the explanation of the particular belief might be different, but as long as the values line up, it's really not that difficult to navigate so far.
How did you choose to come out to your parents and your in-laws and your any siblings other than Nick or whoever? How did you choose to come out to extended family as a non-believer? And what was their reaction? What approach did you take?
Um, I'm not sure there was ever that specific coming out moment with other family for me. Um, I think just little by little over time, it was like in certain conversations, my family, we communicate all the time. My brother and I talk almost every day. My parents and I talk almost every day. So it was very natural for that progression to happen. Just like, I'm not sure about this concept, or the next day we'd be discussing a different topic, and I'm not sure what I think about that. I don't think there was ever that like pivotal moment where I was like, hey, I need you to know I no longer believe this or that. It felt like it was just a very gradual process. The only one for me where that was a very abrupt thing was with my wife. The day that I kind of told her, and even then, I remember she was like, "Well, if you thought that we had no clue, you're you know you're in for a surprise, because we've all been suspecting that this is, that you've been having deep concerns about your beliefs." So that wasn't even a full surprise, but to me it was, to say this is the day where I was coming out. That only happened once for me. And extended, it hasn't happened, with my wife's siblings or her parents. We've never had those moments where I felt the need to, I didn't write them a letter. I didn't. It was just very much a gradual getting more and more used to the idea of, oh, maybe he doesn't believe. But there was never that definitive, let me explain myself to you. I never went through that. I think a lot of what they got was just filtered through asking my wife, so what's going on and things like that.
Got it. And that's an interesting approach. A lot of times people want to write that big letter, or they feel all this anxiety about having that deep conversation or that intense conversation, or they fear rejection, or they fear that how am I going to do this? And you're saying that for you, not having that conversation worked well. My follow up is, well, some would say that's avoidance, like you're just sort of avoiding the elephant in the room. But it doesn't sound like that's how it's turned out. So, how would you explain the fact that, in terms of authenticity and acceptance and directly addressing issues, how can you explain the success of the approach of not having the conversation?
I think in my case, I knew the conversation would be awkward, because I think we were already on such different understandings that, to me, it felt it would have been counterproductive at that point. By the time I felt like, well, okay, let me explain my view, it's been like, well, the only way for you to understand my view would be to spend hours with me talking about it. Um, so I just kind of felt like, I guess it's not necessary for you to know my view. Just know that my view is different than yours, but I hope you don't feel threatened around me, because I don't have any problem with you having the view that you have. I don't know. I never felt that sense of, well, I guess on a few occasions there was that sense of the elephant in the room on a specific trip that we went to, and the family plan was for everyone to go to the temple, and it was kind of, for me, it was awkward to be like, well, I'll watch all the kids. Um, but I think, like I said, everyone's tried to do a really good job of not making it awkward. I think, to their credit, it hasn't really been too difficult of an experience, other than, feeling like it's unfortunate that you feel like I've let you down, because I think that's a natural feeling, for them to feel that I've let them down. But that's not necessarily a bad feeling. It's okay for me. It's okay to know that, somebody thinks I let them down, because of course I did from their perspective, and at the same time, of course I didn't from my perspective. But how do we I'll never be able to fully get someone to understand me. That's, you know what I mean?
Sure. Sure. That makes a lot of sense. So no, we've talked about your parents and Nick, your brother, and your wife, Giselle, an extended family. Just to kind of round out, uh, what was your approach to coming out to both friends and mostly, I mean, neighbors and members of your ward? Uh, did you, bishopric, etc.? Did you feel like you needed to come out to them? Did you not feel like you needed to come out to them? If so, what was their reaction? Did you get love bombed by your ward or stake once they knew you weren't traditional? Were you shunned? Um, yeah, how did you deal with sort of friends, neighbors, Mormon neighbors, and ward members, including leadership?
Sure. So again, for me, none of those interactions were ever. I've never had that coming out moment with anyone. I think the first inkling that people in my community got that something seems different was, the public announcement on Facebook that I teach meditation, or finding out that, oh, he has a podcast called Secular Buddhism. Those were the ways that people, I think, were finding out. Wait a second, what does that mean? But I never explained myself. I've never had that interaction with anyone, from neighbors to anyone, except with my bishop. I felt early on, my bishop is my brother-in-law, and because it was a family relationship, I felt the need for him to know, in the same way that my wife knew, like, this is where I stand with things. I have a hard time believing this or believing that. And we had several long conversations, and it was a very pleasant experience because he's very familiar with all of the concepts, all of the difficulties with church history. He's aware of all of those complications. So I think he was very understanding, at least in the sense of, I know why that would be hard. I think at times it was like, but at the same time, I also know that it worked for me. Why can't it just work for you? And I think sometimes there was a little bit of frustration, like, why can't you just make it work? I know all these things too, and it worked for me. But I was just very clear, like I don't have an answer to that. It just doesn't, and I don't have a position that makes me think that you were wrong for making it work for you. It just doesn't work for me. And I think he's reciprocated that sense of understanding, and that I think he genuinely cares. He genuinely, wants for this to make sense to me, but recognizes it can't just be forced. So we've had a very good working relationship since that. Yeah, and I think it's been good. And I recognize that's not normal. I recognize for a lot of people it's a very difficult experience, and I'm very fortunate that it's worked out this way for me. And I think a part of that is the close, tight-knit aspect of living in a small town. It's like it's not in anyone's interest to set ourselves up to be at awkwardness with each other, because we all see each other all the time. So I think that kind of lends itself to a little bit more openness, and let's try to accept each other in spite of our differences and our different views.
So Noah, if you had to kind of summarize your recommendations for uh, coming out or not coming out regarding your change in belief, your religious belief, to family, friends, community, etc., what would be the do's and the don'ts that seem to occur or seem to have worked or not worked for you? How would you summarize? Somebody's like, I'm thinking about coming out. Maybe I will. How should I do it? What would you say, sort of as guidance, based on your experience?
I would say two things. First, timing. Don't, there's no rush. Only come out if you feel comfortable with stating this is my stance. I think that takes a lot of courage to be willing to just be seen. And the second aspect of all of this, I would say, is really the golden rule. all of the things that we interpret as, people who are former believers or non-believers, that we turn around that really bother us about believers. You're wrong for leaving. The devil has influenced you, or anything that's uncomfortable from the believing side towards you as a non-believer. Recognize that there are the exact same positions inverted. It's easy for us to say, well, your position of belief is less valid than mine. I'm smarter because I don't need God in my life, or any kind of position that sets a believer as being wrong is the very same thing that we don't enjoy feeling from the believing side towards us, that sense of judgment. And I think that one's hard, but it's very doable if you just spend time with it, recognizing that we actually have an upper hand there. We understand, the position of a believer because most of us have been Orthodox believers at one point, and we know how difficult it is to wrap our heads around the idea of non-belief. I would almost say impossible from the Orthodox believing standpoint to understand a non-believer. It just doesn't make sense. So keep that in mind, and if and when you come out to someone, never make them feel wrong for believing in the same way that you don't want to feel wrong for not believing.
One of our listeners asks a really good question. It's from Tammy, and she writes, as a Mormon, especially on my mission, you are encouraged to share your beliefs that are so deeply ingrained that they have become a knowledge, in parentheses, in quotes. Transitioning out of Mormonism brings new knowledge and new facts. How do you marry your ingrained desire to lead people, friends and family, to the truth, and I'd say to keep them safe and healthy, with not wanting to offend and or break a person's belief or testimony?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Tammy. This is kind of the Lehi's dream thing, right? Where you partake of the fruit that to you is good. The natural inclination is to share and say, hey, come taste this. This is incredible. This perspective or this view that I have that resonates with me, that makes sense to me. I want you to experience that. And recognize that we do that with everything. You watch a good movie that you really enjoy. That's the first thing you want to do. You want others to watch it, but watching it's not enough. You want them to love it as much as you did. And if they don't, we all hate that feeling of, well, go watch it again then. You obviously didn't get it. We have that tendency to want others to experience life the way we're experiencing it. And I think something that's been helpful for me is to take that visualization of the tree of life and thinking, well, here's the tree of life and I tasted this fruit. Just zoom out a little bit and recognize, oh, there's another tree of life, there's another one. And you start to see this field full of trees and everyone's tasting their own. And then it makes it a little easier to think, okay, enjoy your fruit over there. I'm enjoying mine over here. My view is mine, your view is yours. And try to recognize that feeling of wanting someone else to experience life the way I'm experiencing it, that's natural, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's necessary or beneficial to share it that way. I feel like in my case, that's kind of how I've done it. It's just been, what resonates with me now is kind of my thing. And I share it in public. I mean, I have a podcast that discusses the way I view the world, but it's never occurred to me that that's something that everyone should listen to. It's more like, no, don't listen to it unless you want to. If you do, you might like it. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that kind of answers the question, but.
Oh, that was great. So Noah, if you had to summarize, what have been the hardest parts about your Mormon religious faith transition?
I would say the hardest parts have probably all been the anticipation of thinking what's going to happen, So ironically, in a way, the hardest parts have all been internal. The anticipation that when my wife finds out, that's it, it's over. That was a very excruciating, 1 year and a half or two. The anticipation of what's it going to be like when the community judges me because I'm not participating in this or that. Again, it's the anticipation of something that may or may not be there. Some may judge, some will judge, some won't judge. Most probably won't really care that much. But it's the anxiety that I put myself through with anticipating how I think something's going to unfold. And that's also been the most enjoyable part of this whole process is reaching a certain spot and realizing it didn't happen that way at all. It was reciprocated with love or with support or with kindness, and I was not expecting that. Those have been the most painful and the most rewarding parts of going through this faith transition.
Yeah, how about the surprise? Well, we're getting to this, so I'll not say it, but I was just going to say, what about the surprise that in some cases relationships get better? But don't answer that because I'm about to ask another question.
Okay.
Any other really hard parts about the transition? Uh,
Um, no, I think the hardest parts have been centered around people. You know, how are others going to see me? That's probably where the hardest parts have all centered. The actual, if you were to cut people out of that, assuming there were no other people, it hasn't really been hard. It's just, well, this is new, and now this is how I view this. But
what about the
it's
loss of your beliefs, the loss of your perception of God, the loss of your confidence in an afterlife? We'll get to all those topics specifically, but wasn't the loss of all those internal things hard?
I think it was at first. I think anytime you're going through um, a transition, it's that moment of uncertainty that's hard. And you see this in any transition. It's when you're still trying to decide, do I believe what I believe? That's painful and that's turmoil. The moment you decide, now I'm pretty certain I don't believe what I believed, then there's peace again. But everything in between is where it's tumultuous. And I feel like I certainly experienced that. It was when I was able to come to terms with it's just not what I believe. But now there was certainty again. The certainty is I don't know what I believe about this, or I don't know what I believe about that. Then I was at peace again.
Got it. So, Noah, similarly, what have been the best parts about your transition? What were the good or the happy or the rewarding or fulfilling things that came from the transition itself? Not the after, but just what was good about the transition? What were the best parts?
Of the actual transition,
Yeah.
I would say relationships. There were people in my life that I was not as close to as I could have been because I held them at arm's length. Specifically, I had an old friend from college who's gay, and I felt like it's okay to be friends, but not too close because I don't support your lifestyle. And going through the transition opened up a lot of new ways for me to feel authentically close to someone because I no longer felt any sense of judgment on their lifestyle. It just felt like, wow, this whole time you're this incredible person, and I didn't see that because I thought you were living wrong. Um, I experienced that with a cousin. I experienced that with a friend in college. I experienced that with another close family member who had left the church many, many years before. And I always kind of viewed her with somewhat of judgment, thinking, this is someone who had been on a mission. You're not supposed to go down that. You're not supposed to ever go down that route. And I started to see people in a new light as I was transitioning, that it was a light that felt much more kind and warm and compassionate. I wasn't being blinded by the judgment that I didn't even realize was righteous judgment.
Any other best parts about the transition?
Um, Not that I can think of.
Okay. Noah, what resources do you recommend for people who are experiencing a Mormon faith transition or just a religious transition overall? What were the resources that were most helpful to you in navigating that transition?
For me, certainly in the Mormon context, it was absolutely beneficial to discover there were other people out there who had doubts, who were trying to make sense of things. So coming across Mormon stories was a pivotal part of that process for me. And realizing from that moment on, like there are others who understand me, and people that I understand. So that was a huge part of it. Probably that was the most important part of it, I think, for me.
Any other books or web resources or anything?
I remember reading a book called Beyond Religion by the Dalai Lama that was pretty impactful for me. He kind of laid out this view of humanity, where what if our sense of morals came from a layer deeper than our beliefs. And he kind of equated it to, you have a cup of tea, and the flavor, the tea, is the various religions. There's this tea and there's that tea, but what actually gives you sustenance, what you would live from by drinking tea, is the water, not the flavor. And that water, those are universal things like kindness and compassion and love, and those things can all exist independent of religion, independent of the specific flavoring or beliefs that we add to it. And I thought it was a really neat thing to read that and discover, oh, that's why you have kind atheists or kind, you're going to have kind humans, and then you're going to have unkind humans also on either end of that spectrum of belief.
Right. Okay, so that book was helpful. Any other resources that you would point people to help them work through this?
Not that I can think of at the moment. I mean, meditation and mindfulness was really instrumental for me. I feel like the more I understood and studied mindfulness, the more at peace I was with everything. And a lot of that phase of anger that I had towards the church, that all went away through studying mindfulness and Buddhism.
Great. So that's a recommendation to check out secularbuddhism.com, right?
Sure, yeah.